Hello and welcome to the Expat Show, a radio show in colour. We've got a few cameras, even though it is a radio show. And today, joining us in the studio is Scott Hazlitt.
Hi,
Hello,
Barry.
Scott, who is from California.
Originally, but I've been here for a long time.
And now he's been converted to German.
That's right.
A German citizen,
right.
like myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and also joining us from a little further away is John Goodyear, our regular man, John Goodyear, not in the studio. Where are you, John?
Hello there, Barry, and hello there, Scott. I'm up here in Flensburg, not all that far from the Danish border.
Right, well, a little more from John later on, who'll be talking about eccentrics, quite a few British eccentrics, I do believe, but more on that later. He'll be talking about some politicians who are eccentric. And talking of politicians, I do believe there are quite a few eccentrics in the European Parliament, perhaps, going by the fact that going by the fact that now they're saying that after Brexit there could be a threat to fish and chips, that Brits may not be able to get their serving of fish and chips. Joining us on the line now is George Pappas. Hello, George. Can you hear us?
Guten Tag, Barry and Scott. How are you doing?
Fine, very good.
Maybe I should just explain that George actually owns a very big empire. In fact, he owns the world's largest fish and chip shop, or restaurant, I should say, and many restaurants in Yorkshire and in Lincolnshire. Is that right, George?
That's correct. Yeah, we own the world's largest fish and chip shop on the Cleethorpes Pier with over 500 seats, serving thousands of portions of fish and chips just from one restaurant every single week. But all the way up on the northeast Yorkshire coast to Scarborough and Whitby, we've got fish and chip restaurants.
Right. So what do you think about this, that we might not be able to get so much of this white fish we enjoy so much?
It's a tricky one. I mean, as you know, in the news every day, there's been a different story, scaremongering as what could happen post Brexit, and this seems to be another one of those stories. In terms of the feedback we're getting from our fish suppliers and from our supply chain, things seem to be at the moment very stable. Obviously, nobody really knows the true extent of what would happen with a no-deal Brexit, and that's not just true for the fish and chip world. I think that's true for many industries. But we've taken it. We've taken steps. We've gone over to Norway. We've spoken with with the skippers, with the guys that work on the boats that we source our fish from, that gets landed into the Grimsby market fresh every single day, and we've been filled with confidence. We are a resilient industry. You've got to remember, in the World Wars, fish and chips was the only meal that wasn't rationed, and it's been going strong ever since. And it's the nation's favourite dish for a simple reason, that it's nutritious, but it's also very affordable. So, as pioneers in that industry, who have a massive stakeholder in the industry, we're committed to maintaining that. And maintaining fish and chips' reputation, not only in England, but also worldwide for everybody who visits, the British coast and wants to sample our delicacy. So we're feeling pretty confident at the moment.
Wow.
It's true that,
we're not going to lose.
We export a lot of the fish.
Yeah, we're not going to lose our fish and chips then. It'll be business.
We're not concerned about that in one single bit. We're pretty confident, actually, that... despite what the headlines are saying, we've got a great supply of fish to keep our nation's appetite satisfied for a very long time.
And if
we are, go ahead, Barry.
I was going to say, if Mr. Juncker walked into your restaurant, would he be very welcome?
We welcome everybody into our restaurant, and I'm sure that actually, a delicious serving of fish and chips may be precisely what's needed to settle the atmosphere and get people. I'm sure that Theresa May would also enjoy a a delicious serving of a German sausage or something like that, something to settle the mood and get people talking a little bit better.
George, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And when I'm over,
and you're all welcome to our restaurant when you're visiting the UK.
Yes. I was going to say when I'm over in the Hull area, I shall be into your restaurant like a shot. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing you at Papa's Fish and Chips, Britain's best fish and chip shop.
Okay. Many thanks indeed. Thank you.
My pleasure. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. That was George Pappas. And there you are. That's the genuine thing.
That's right.
The malt vinegar and salt.
It goes with fish, but you can use it as a hair topping as well.
You need those for genuine fish and chips.
That's right. This is the stuff here.
Let's call up, is it Schleswig-Holstein we're going to?
That's right, Barry. I'm sitting here at the Akademie Sankelmark, which is just south of Flensburg, and I'm at a conference today talking about eccentrics, about English eccentrics specifically, ranging from those in the long-distant past, thinking of Lord North, who went to bed in October and got up in March, or thinking of the present day, the likes of Boris Johnson or even Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Eccentrics. So let's begin. What sort of eccentrics are we talking about then? Would you like to give some details here?
Yeah, so it's not just political eccentrics. We're looking at this particular conference, this particular 2-day event about eccentrics who are the dandy, so the notion of the fashionable, but those that stand on the outer edge of what is perceived to be normal. Or we're looking at the monarch of George IV, who was pretty eccentric in his ways. We're also looking at authors, for instance, Agatha Christie. Apparently she had great eccentricity in her, and how this is really a quality of the English psyche, that we somehow love these eccentrics. I recall a few months ago, Barry, on your show yourself, you may be able to remember it, that a member of the Monster Raving Loony Party was interviewed. And that is the very essence of eccentricity and being eccentric.
Yeah, well, you can't get much more eccentric than the Monster Raving Loony Party, though actually they're not as stupid as they make themselves out to be, are they, really?
No, that's absolutely right. One of the things I said today in the talk that I gave that went over an hour and a half was the foundings of this party. It goes back to the 60s with Mr. Such, or Lord Such as he was called, Screaming Lord Such. He was a great English eccentric, and he set up the party after the Profumo affair, that great sexual scandal, or the sex scandal, that pretty much almost toppled the government. And he then stood in a by-election in Stratford-upon-Avon. That was the seat that was made vacant, and of course used all of these outrageous slogans and these suggestions that we should, for instance, I don't know, let's reduce the election age to 18, or put commercials on radio, or even let's change our pub opening times. And lo and behold, in the 60s, it was all pie in the sky, but actually later on, it was all introduced.
That's right, it happened.
It actually happened. Yeah. So the eccentrics, even though they're at the edge of society, they're coming up with schemes that we think today they're a bit loopy, but actually in the longer term, in the grander scheme of things, some of these eventually become law.
What makes an eccentric?
That's a good question, Barry. Do you have that word cloud I sent to you?
Yes,
we do.
Would you like to punch that
certainly,
up?
Yep.
Yeah, because one of the things that I did during the talk is actually find out what the Germans in the audience, this is a German, I gave the talk in German incidentally, it's a German event held here in Schleswig-Holstein, and I asked the audience, after putting on a film of Boris Johnson, what they thought to him, and they came up with all of these answers. Scott and I, we've already seen this table. Scott, what jumped out at yourself?
Well, the thing about these is that always goes through my mind is when someone like Boris Johnson gets there and has these ideas, you think he cannot be serious, right? So the German word would be unseriös. He's not
unseriös, yeah.
Right. And it also, you get the feeling they're just trying to put themselves across here, and so they're very egocentric as well, because it's like I'm it. That's another characteristic, I think, and they want people to pay a lot of attention to them.
Right. You mentioned Boris Johnson. So
right.
We've got a picture, just in case anyone doesn't know what Boris Johnson looks like.
Right.
That is Boris Johnson. Right. Back to you then, Scott.
Right. So those are three of these words that you had in this in your graphic here that occurred to me. The things I think about when you obviously it's another thing that occurs. I mean, this is not British anymore, but to me, Donald Trump is very eccentric because
say that, Scott.
Donald Trump is very eccentric to me. Because these things occur to you think he can't be serious with these things he's saying. He loves the camera, and what was the other thing? Yeah, he wants to attract attention to himself. So these are things that he does have in common with these other people as well, with Boris Johnson, I think.
Now, actually, John, we've got a caption here with all these words on.
Right.
Yes.
We've cut it up now. Yeah. So it's got some German words on there, and
only German words.
Only. Although there's one word that says plump.
But that's a German slang word. Yeah, it means he's kind of like, well, yeah.
So explain, John.
I think what you have here is a whole range of different types of words. It's interesting what Scott said about Donald Trump being eccentric. I think one of the things that has happened, and that was something I tried to say in the talk, with this new media age, that eccentrics have gone from the very edge of society. They're not outcasts, but they do things that are on the very edge of society, and somehow they've gone right into the centre. So eccentrics have become the norm, and we've seen this in politics, particularly with the likes of Boris Johnson, and we can think of Jacob Rees-Mogg. And then in the States, these crazy things that Donald Trump comes out with, that is obviously they're not the norm.
Yeah.
But the extent to which there might well be an American eccentric idea versus a British one. So the idea of eccentricity is probably not a Donald Trump one-to-one. That's how we've seen it so far in the conference, the Tagung, as they say in German, here today. But there may well be similarities as they move towards the center ground.
I think it has changed too. What people used to say, when someone did quirky things, then they'd be eccentric. And for example, Howard Hughes, the billionaire that died, what was it, in the early 70s or something? He was so eccentric, but he was a recluse. He was the opposite of what now he didn't want to be in front of the camera, but he did. His things got in the press nevertheless, like buying 300 gallons of banana nut ice cream from a manufacturer there, or not using the toilet, peeing in these bottles and lining the bottles up around the edge of the things like that. He was a genius, but he didn't want to be in the focus. And now I get the feeling that a lot of eccentric people they use the media to express this.
International, or would you say Britain and America are more eccentrics? Which
I don't know.
Where are the most?
I think it's maybe you could say that various countries have their own brand of What do you say?
Because I was going to say, what about North Korea? They've got a rather eccentric man at the top, haven't they?
Well, I've been to North Korea.
You've been everywhere, John.
Yes, I know. No, I haven't. I've not been everywhere. But
almost.
That's a place of... it is bizarre in that respect. It is ex of centre. You know, it's right on the very edge of what we can perceive to be as normal. So in that regard, if you define it, eccentric as being, what you're on the edge away from where everything is happening. North Korea is very much on the edge of the entire world. So yes, perhaps you do have various eccentrics. I think Japan would be a really interesting country to look at. It's an island country. It doesn't have a border with anyone. It's quite insular. And I don't know much about Japanese eccentrics, but I think that would be a really interesting one to look at, whereas North Korea has made itself insular.
I get the impression that people in Japan, they're all eccentrics compared to us.
Compared to us, yeah.
I saw a television show the other evening. Tony Robinson, the actor, was over there. And he met all these people, and people dressing up in costumes and doing all kinds of things. And I thought, they're all eccentric in Japan.
Well, another thing that occurs to me, this isn't Japan, but Germany has a few people like that as well. What about Karl Lagerfeld?
Actually, that's a great example.
Because I think one aspect that just occurred to me is that these people are often very intelligent. They're not some stupid moron that just, is trying to get attention. They're often very intelligent people. And if you look at what Karl Lagerfeld achieved in his life, but on the other hand, I've seen him in talk shows, and you think, oh gosh, he's I don't like this, I don't like that, and all this stuff, and the way he looks and everything. But those were the things. He wanted to be on the focus. He was a great photographer. An excellent fashion designer, but he was also a weightlifter for a while. And there's these pictures of him. He looks kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger at some point. A lot of people don't know that, but he liked to get a lot of attention too, as well. And the other thing is, he acted probably with Boris Johnson and the others. They say, "Well, I don't care what other people think of me. This is just me, and accept it the way it is or don't." So
I think there you're absolutely right, Scott. The idea of the individual and being allowed to express your individuality, and it doesn't matter what the main group in society are doing. If you're doing something different, it doesn't really matter. I think the difference between England, because we're focusing on English eccentrics, of course, there's probably a lot of eccentrics up in Scotland, Wales, and in Northern Ireland, but we're focusing very much on the English ones. I think this sense of individual freedom, this individual expression and the ability to express, and then people just let them get on with it. Whereas in Germany, I don't think to the extent, in fact, no, I really sense to the extent they don't have it inside their culture. It's more, as a speaker said yesterday, it is more Prussian. So it's all about order and about
conforming.
Yeah,
conformity. Yeah. Whereas eccentric is, of course, about non-conformity. You don't conform to the norm.
So in Britain, we have more eccentrics, you think, because we don't conform so much.
Right. Well, maybe it's because I'm not British, so I'm just saying this, but I think John said this to me before, is that the British are very structured and reserved, and they don't. But the average person, I think, doesn't want to be at the focus of things. So maybe this is the reaction to some people saying, "I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to break out of this," and that's the opposite.
I think more Brits are eccentric than there are Germans. I think if we're looking at stereotypes, I think Germans they conform, and the Brits are a little more eccentric. And
maybe that's even more because the Prussian thing is not all of Germany, right?
That's I think, true, Scott. Yeah, that's true.
And I think that maybe the general feeling or the general way people are in Britain is what is society like, just lends more to the fact of people breaking out of that just as a people.
Is eccentricity also linked to being an extrovert? I mean, does it help? If you want to be considered eccentric, you also have to be a bit of an extrovert as well.
That's what I was. A difficult one. I think that's a difficult one because looking over the course of time, going back to the 16th century, some of the eccentrics that I have looked into have, for instance, built underground tunnels and lived pretty much underground, or they went. There was one. An aristocrat who came over to Germany, was so impressed by the natural water springs that he went back home and spent most of his life in water. And he grew this huge beard. But some of these instances, they don't like to be seen. So they don't like to be in public. So this idea of an eccentric being the center of attention, as time has gone on, and I think with this digital age, this is probably going to change with eccentrics. You know, you're more likely to click on YouTube some video that looks crazy and eccentric as opposed to something that looks sort of serious.
Just a reminder that the eccentrics you're watching right now are myself, Barry Redfern. We've got Scott Hazlitt in the studio with us, and of course John Goodyear.
I can do a Boris eccentric hair thing if you want me to, Barry. There we go. Boris's hair for you.
And Boris Johnson we've been talking about as well. Now, as I said, this is the Expat Show, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, let me just give you the email address. Just drop us an email to studio@expat.show. We'd love to hear your views and ideas about anything you might like to have incorporated in the show. Anyway, back to the show now. And John, eccentrics. Did you say we're getting more and more eccentrics now thanks to social media like YouTube?
It's obviously very, very difficult to measure. Back in the 80s, I believe it was, a doctor actually did an experiment. He put lots of signs up and asked eccentrics to contact him so he could do a study. And he got hundreds, if not thousands, of eccentrics registering their interest. And his study looked at these individual people. So there was a kind of a count going on there. But to actually measure over the course of time whether there are more eccentrics, you know, in the 16th century, in the 17th century, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the last century, or in this century, I think is very difficult. I think what is happening, though, is you've got this change in society whereby more people are living out their lives online, you know, digitally. And if something is eccentric in terms of content, it is not normal, as I said a few moments ago. And I think because of the non-normal nature of the kinds of things they do, they say, they are in terms of humor, in terms of clothing, I think all of those aspects attract people to click onto them, and that the eccentric is no longer on the edge of society, or perceived to be, you know, on the edge, but actually is moving to the center ground. It could be a great book or a great piece of work to actually look at this, you know, the role of eccentrics in Brexit, or the role of eccentrics in getting, for instance, Donald Trump elected to the White House. I'm going to ask Scott this because obviously he's more connected to American politics than myself. Do you get this sense, Scott? You know, eccentric behaviour online. Is this something that you yourself, you know, you click on and watch, or is this something?
Well, I think you're right, John. It's more interesting than if you look at someone the usual do-it-yourself video. How do I put together this cupboard or something? People are not very interested in that. I mean, of course, you have an interest group there, but I think the more eccentric it is, the more off the wall, as we'd say it is in the States, the more interesting it is, the more viewers you get. Yeah. So I think you see that in a lot of areas. The norm is boring.
I've got a question for you, John, because our guy doing the vision switching today, Bastian Spiller. There he is. He's looks like he's taking part of the show today. He said a question. This will set you thinking, John. He says, "Isn't Brexit very eccentric itself?"
Yes, extremely eccentric, and is a mirror of on a nation that does pride itself in having its eccentrics and being eccentric. But I think Brexit is obviously, it's not something that's done in the centre. Obviously, the centre for the European Union is in Brussels. But the mindset of this island, the mindset of being on the edge of this, on the periphery of what is Europe, with Brussels as one of its major centres, and also the city that's obviously constantly attacked for producing a bureaucracy that was the scourge, and really that's the pin-up poster of the Brexiteers, among other things, was this European bureaucracy, other than the 300 million for or whatever the figure was for the health service. So I think the answer to that question is yes, it does appear to be eccentric, and even the whole process, and I'm sure I don't need to repeat what's been going on in the UK in the media and in public discourse. The whole process appears to be absolutely far away from the normal centre, and people engaged in debate that they wouldn't have been engaged in before. So it's moved and it's shifted and it's become the centre ground, and it's probably something that we're going to have to live with for a long, long time to come.
Scott.
Yes.
Who's your favourite eccentric?
My favorite eccentric? I think I actually say probably he's dead now, but Karl Lagerfeld was high on my list.
Why?
Because he achieved a lot, but he also told people, which I kind of admired, he said, if you don't like it, piss off. Right? If you don't like the way I am, he didn't even bother with that. He said in these interviews, the interviewer would say, well, how do you say when people react to this and this and this? He said, I don't care. I'm not interested in what they think. And he really believed that. And I think it's not always the right way to go. I'm more a person that likes to make compromise in things, but I admired that. And he had his direction and he took it. And of course, he was heavily criticized a lot of times. I think that's if you could take it, and he had things to show for it. He wasn't just some nut who was doing these things where people said, that's really strange. He was a great, like I said, fashion designer, an excellent photographer. And he had his own angle on things. And I think that's, I really like that.
Okay. And John,
if it's the same question, Barry, which I'm presuming it is, I do like the Monty Python Flying Circus.
Yes.
And I think all of that group, particularly John Cleese, I think is the epitome, is the figure of English, specifically English eccentricity. So if you think of the comedy that came out, it's all very silly, slapstick, but it is laughing at oneself or at yourself. And I think that's something that English people, if it's a national sport, if it were a national sport, we would win gold very, very often.
Yes.
And I think that's something that that John Cleese and co managed to do most spectacularly.
John Goodyear, thank you very much indeed. And Scott Hazlitt, thank you also for joining us in the studio today.
Always happy to be here.
And also not forgetting Bastian Spiller, who's
switching those cameras.
Been cutting all the pictures. Right. But from all of us here for now, until next month, it's goodbye.
Bye.